Here we go. This is an analysis of TOC finals. I'm actually kind of juking you out here. I'm not going to play the constructives because I'm kind of washed, and that compounded with the fact that the audio is not very good means they're pretty difficult to flow without the docs. Like, for example, if we play this a bit, it's kind of incomprehensible, at least to me. So, fortunately, I have the docs from the round. So, I'm just going to walk through this card by card and give a little analysis why I think this is a very strategic case. Um, a little bit sad that it's labeled 1 and C. We're taking a lot of the policy terms now, but it's fine. So it's got three contentions. I think this is an incredibly strategic con case for Strake to be reading in this round. So let's just dive in. Contention one is AI bubble. I think it's smart to put this first because it's probably the least strong of the arguments in terms of strategic value in this round, but I think it's still a good argument. Obviously, it's in TOC finals. Let's look at each of the cards and like construct the argument together. The first one is the uniqueness card that AI powered investments are currently diversified. Software and renewables are prioritized over nuclear. Let's look at what the card actually says based on the highlighting and some of the stuff around it. So they say that data centers are predicted to consume a lot of electricity. Companies are throwing billions of dollars at nuclear, but maybe the problem is overblown. This all says like, someone's going to make AI more efficient. So maybe it's DeepSeek, maybe it's someone else. And that means that it will probably, and that will probably happen faster than the time that it takes to build new power plants, which means the investment in nuclear power plants now is driven by a kind of mirage of demand that is inspired by electricity demand from AI power centers. And those power centers are likely in the future, quite quickly, to not actually require as much energy as they currently do, or is projected for them to require, which means that like the scenario here is maybe we suddenly start constructing a bunch of nuclear energy based on the expectation that we will need a lot of that energy for AI in the future. But then in the process of us constructing that, suddenly they're like, oh, we made new technological progress. We don't actually need as much energy. We need like 1/4 of the energy we thought we would. And so then those become stranded assets, which means that the investment in those nuclear power plants sort of goes to waste. Maybe we can repurpose them for something else, but they certainly won't be used to satisfy the AI demand, which is no longer there. And so that will create a bubble pop, right? The expectation of profit for those plants will be much lower, or the expectation will be much higher than the actual profits turn out to be, which causes investors to flee the industry, perhaps, and that would be very bad for the economy. That's the basic scenario that's being laid out here. I think this card is very efficient at doing it. The other cards maybe will help, but I think this card is sufficient to sort of outline that general story. So in that context, tech companies, power investments appear to be hedges in case their software bets don't pan out. So this means like the most likely scenario is that AI becomes much more energy efficient, but just in case that doesn't happen, the tech companies are kind of being smart and they're diversifying their investments. They're investing in some power investments like nuclear industry, and maybe like we'll see later in the card renewables as well, just in case the expected decrease in necessity for power does not actually happen. Um, but this is a bit of a weird line from the card. I think this actually hurts some of the narrative because the narrative is kind of like we expect a lot of demand for power from AI, but this line in the card says maybe actually tech companies are being quite smart and they don't necessarily expect a lot of power from AI. They're only investing in order to diversify into like some percent chance that it doesn't pan out, that we have a much lower requirement for energy in the future. That is a problem for the narrative because maybe it means that investors are actually pricing all of this into their calculations in a strategic way, which would mean that it's unclear how the link necessarily inflates the bubble or why the bubble will even happen in the first place. But it says absent demand from AI, cost pressures are probably going to increase. This is important because it's in the context of the paragraph before. This paragraph, I think, might be the weakest paragraph of the card in the context of this round. They say, where will that leave nuclear startups and energy companies? This is like if if the expectations do pan out to reduce the necessity for energy in the future because there's a greater efficiency. If that happens, then it depends. This is a problem for the argument a little bit. Some might be able to produce power at a low enough cost that it won't matter if AI's power needs ebb, which is a problem, right? This is built-in defense, at least mitigatory against the link to the bubble argument. Um, so yeah, it says that this part is kind of damning, right? Demand for electricity was expected to grow even before AI, so maybe these won't actually be stranded assets. The bubble won't necessarily pop, or it won't pop that much because there will be other energy needs inevitably that grow into the future, even in the absence of AI. that will still allow these nuclear power plants to be quite profitable. Maybe the profit is delayed a little bit, and so that makes investors unhappy, but it might not be sufficient to create this massive bubble pop scenario that the neg is outlining. So there's some problems. I think the card is a little bit shaky, but the general narrative that it sets up is quite good. The next card, the AF succumbs to lobbyists that overvalue nuclear. So this again paints the link picture. Like if we affirm, then we succumb to these myths that nuclear energy is going to be very profitable that actually end up being false. I think this card is also quite good. The hype cycle is real in history. There's a lot of historical evidence that like nuclear energy companies promised this funding backed by public funding, so backed by government investment. So basically, in the past, when we did something similar to affirming, then we saw that there was a much bigger projection in profits compared to what actually panned out, and a much smaller projection in cost than the costs that actually were incurred, which might have caused something that looks like a bubble. Um, I guess one problem with this is that it looks like maybe this could create thumpers on the argument. Like, okay, then why didn't those other bubbles cause the impact? But it does have a built-in answer, which is like maybe this is a unique situation because of the scale of demand that is driven by AI, which hadn't happened in those past examples. So I think it's a quite good card. Next, reckless spending pops a bubble. Um, Okay, energy efficiency is a better bet than the largest energy production ramp up. So again, we're talking about efficiency. This is a nice little embedded piece of defense. I think this is kind of a spike. SMR power bubble, AI power bubble might end up being a borderline con. So notably, I think that this is not the AI bubble; it's the AI power bubble, right? So more like the nuclear energy bubble. Mini nukes have no product, no design, no technology that's been tested, no regulatory approval, etc. So these SMRs are themselves kind of a link to the bubble that is unique, that's hidden in here. So it's kind of a hidden link and also a hidden spike because if the AF goes for any solvency that's premised on SMR technology specifically, there are these like bunch of warrants that are hidden in here why they won't actually work out. I guess three of them are highlighted here. So that's nice. If they concede that, then you get some nice link defense that it is maybe terminal if the entire app is premised on SMRs, at the very least mitigatory against that kind of the strength of their link if any of their link depends on the SMRs at all. It prevents them from also using that as defense against some of your complaints with nuclear energy. Next, bubble severity matters the most. Maybe a little bit power tagged, but I get it. It's an impact, right? Big tech is on pace to plow $1 trillion to power AI. It's an investment spree, but there are bottlenecks for the power industries that point to an AI bubble. This is a little bit different. This is like an AI bubble rather than just an AI power bubble. I guess specifically, this is the AI power bubble will create an AI bubble, but it also unfortunately mentions semiconductors, which is definitely a non-unique on the argument, or at the very least, some kind of thumper. Should the bubble burst, we have a big panic and an economic contagion. So this is a great impact evidence. Crater the AI industry is pretty good. Problem is, I think that it non-uniques itself quite substantially. Like this doesn't really seem to mention nuclear energy specifically very much, and even if it does, it's not highlighted, and also like doesn't seem to like be unique as a warrant for the reason that this will happen in the card. And it looks like all of this is written in the context of the status quo, right? So it looks like all of these bottlenecks and stuff are just from the power industry in general. And so actually, unfortunately, this could even be a flip for the AF, right? The AF could say this is good uniqueness that says it's try or die. There are current supply bottlenecks for the power industry, which is why we need to scale up power investment into things like nuclear energy, which can prevent those supply bottlenecks and potentially avoid an AI bubble. After all, one way to avoid a bubble is actually with public investments that can keep these industries aloft and keep them profitable, even in the face of conditions in the market that should make them unprofitable, right? This can create a soft landing at the very least, because if normally, like if it turns out, for example, the AI and demand for energy does not pan out, in that case, the nuclear energy companies will not be making as much money as they thought they would. But if they get subsidized increasingly by the US government, they can sort of get bailed out, kind of like banks have been in the past, which might arguably prevent a bit of an economic collapse. It might prevent this impact scenario. It might also cause other problems, like this might cause a moral hazard effect in the industry, but that would be kind of a reach for the neg to pivot to later in the round. So I think it's a smart response to read against this. So this card I think is very dangerous in the neg case because it allows the AF a lot of ground to turn the argument. And at the very least, it non-uniques the argument quite substantially. Next card says decline causes war. Okay, this is sort of generic, right? Like historical examples in Russia and China of how wars and aggression came after the economies went downhill. It's because of diversion, exploiting identities of us versus them. So this is kind of rally around the flag effect, pretty typical stuff. I kind of wish the warrant was highlighted a little bit more because it's kind of like what, like 5 words here? Diversionary conflict by exploiting identities, maybe diversionary, and maybe exploiting identities. So that's like 3 words that could be construed as warrants. But it's better than a lot of other cards. So I think it's sufficient in this round. And then extinction, sure, nuclear strikes may lead to a lot of bad things. Again, maybe you would prefer more warranting highlighted in this card, but it's also science, so it's unclear how much you actually have to warrant stuff that seems to be just like a scientific hypothesis or something. Um, so seems sufficient. So let's just do a quick analysis of this entire contention and its strategic value. So there's a good war scenario built in here, but I think the real value of this contention, that maybe this is a sneak peek sort of spoiler, but I think is maybe underutilized in this round, is that it has enormous potential for hidden spikes against a lot of affirmative contention. So for example, I can think of sort of three off the dome. Number one is this argument here. There are 2 cards about efficiency. This is the first card about efficiency that's in the context of AI. And then there's another card that just says sort of efficiency in general. It might also be in the context of AI now that I think about it. But regardless of what the context is, yeah, this is in the context of AI as well. But regardless of the context, both of these cards sort of imply that there's likely to be a very strong increase in energy efficiency into the future in sectors that make up a very large portion of the market. This is important because this could be construed as a non-unique to the solvency from the pro. So for example, for a warming scenario, which is what the app actually ends up going for in this round, you could say that this is actually a conceded piece of solvency. Like they're focused on fixing and reforming the supply side, but actually the demand side is what we need to focus on, and that's being solved in the status quo through steady reductions in the amount of energy that's required. So actually, the demand for electricity itself is declining rapidly over time and is likely to decline more precipitously into the future, which means that we don't necessitate anything like a shift to nuclear energy. This is both a link to the scenario of the bubble, but it's also alternative solvency that's maybe happening in the status quo or forecasted in the future in the status quo trend that could also be a legitimate solution to warming without necessitating the nuclear energy shift, which means the AF doesn't get try or die, for example, and it also supercharges with uniqueness. It gives uniqueness to all of the turns that you might read later in the round and all of the link ends and short circuits that you might read against the AF. It at least allows you maybe to tiebreak or supercharge some of those, which is I think really really good. You could even implicate that as terminal if you have the right spin on it later in the round. And that's something that I don't think the AF will ever catch. So that's really good. The second thing that I think you can do here is, I guess technically, I already said this, you can sort of use the SMR stuff and some of these arguments in general to say that, like, actually, it's just paper nukes. It's not actually a product that will meaningfully reduce climate change. It won't actually work, basically. So there's a whole third contention we'll talk about later in this constructive that basically says a lot of warrants that have the same implication, which is that the affirmative will not actually work, the implementation will fail or fall short in some way. I think this is an extra one that's sort of hidden in the first contention, which is a really good strategy because it means that it's very likely that the AF drops it, especially if there's a whole other contention devoted to this, then it's sort of a smokescreen, if that makes sense. Like it makes it much less likely that they will look for that kind of spike in the other contentions, which makes it more deadly. This one might be more mitigatory, but I think the other ones maybe are more terminal, like the solvency non-unique. The third one, and this might be the most important one, is that I think the implication of there being a nuclear power sector bubble in the first place because of all of this means that that bubble will pop, right? That's the argument, is that like the nuclear power sector will scale up faster than actual value accrues, which means eventually investors will realize that they are overvaluing the nuclear power sector and they will all pull out. What does that mean? It causes a collapse of the nuclear power sector, which probably will last well into the future. And might actually do net harm to the nuclear industry. So I think if you're able to do that, and you're able to say that a nuclear power bubble collapses the industry, even if it's non-unique, this is a kicker, right? Even if it's non-unique, that is a short circuit to the affirmative solvency, which means a non-unique short circuit also still applies. That just becomes defense. And it means that the solvency from the AF at the very least will not be very long in terms of time frame, and so it won't be a legitimate solution to warming in the future. That I think is maybe the most effective thing that they could do. Obviously, this depends on winning a lot of the link arguments in this contention. But as we'll see later in the round, almost I think all of Plano's responses are either impact defense on the war scenario, which doesn't matter to any of those three paths, or they are non-uniques. And the non-uniques don't matter to any of those three paths either, right? Like the first one was intended to be uniqueness anyway. So it doesn't matter if it's non-unique. If like the whole point is that it is non-unique, right? That in either world we get an increase in energy efficiency, which is sufficient to solve warming. So that doesn't matter. And it doesn't matter to the other two because the other two are just like the second one is an argument about the nature of nuclear energy being ineffective, which cannot really be non-unique. And the last one is a short circuit. So if you non-unique that, it just means that you're saying that in either world, nuclear energy is doomed as a solution to warming as well, which unfortunately takes out your solvency, which is the only offense the AF has in this round. So I think that in any scenario where the AF is mostly relying on non-uniques or impact defense, like in this round, it would be incredibly strategic for Strake to pivot to some of these other cross applications of cards or individual premises from the contention. And this is why I think this contention is like very smart in this round. Even if like the original setup of the contention, I think, is generally weak, as in winning like A to Z on the contention from uniqueness all the way to the terminal impact seems somewhat dubious. I don't think this argument is true, and there are lots of intuitive responses like Plano actually ends up reading in this round. But the individual spikes that are sort of hidden in here have a lot of promise for being like effectively cross-applied to some of the arguments on the AF. Probably most of the arguments the AF could make actually can have cross applications from these individual spikes. Okay, let's read contention two. Contention two is a politics DA. They say that the reconciliation bill, the budget reconciliation, will pass now, but unity is key. So the argument is basically there's a bill in Congress that will do a lot of important things, but it will also have to include the affirmative if we vote pro right now. If it includes the affirmative, the bill will not pass, whereas it would pass in the status quo. So the bill only passes if you vote con, and it creates a lot of important things that will prevent extinction in some way. In this case, I think it's about defense budget and like modernization, things like that. So let's read the first card. This is uniqueness. It says it will pass now. Um, I think this is like a 2 out of 10 card. It's quite recent. That's great. But I think the actual words in the card are pretty like not mishighlighted, but yeah, I mean, let's just read through it. I think this is a whole bunch of nothing. Republicans works through issues. There's communication. Chambers work with White House, adopted a blueprint laying out the parameters. Republicans reconcile differences, hitting ground running. Unfortunately, if you read the context around the highlighted words, most of these, with the exception of one, are recommendations or like requirements rather than what is happening in Squo. There's like one sentence here that is what is happening in Squo, which is this. After a last minute scramble, both chambers last month adopted a blueprint laying out the parameters for the final bill. But the blueprint contained differing instructions for House and Senate committees on a host of issues, and it left debates between conservatives and moderates over spending cuts and taxes unresolved. So that seems pretty bad. And if we look at any of the other sentences here, they're all sort of recommendations, right? Or like necessities. They're not descriptions of what the status quo looks like. So this says Republicans are staring down a key 4 week stretch as the party works through a series of hot button issues. Not that the working through of those hot button issues are successful. Then it says, as long as we're communicating with both sides and there's an open line of communication and we don't start isolating ourselves, then maybe it will be kept in check, right? Like this whole paragraph says it is shaky, but it might work if A and B and C are true. Not that those things are true. I mean, I guess it says as long as we're doing this, but like it doesn't even say as long as we're continuing to do this. It just says as long as we do this, but we don't know that doing this is true. So like logic, this is not a description of the status quo, unfortunately. And if it is, it's a shaky one at best, right? Then we have this guy. This is maybe the strongest one, right? Mullen predicted that there would be a few issues that are going to make tension. This actually seems quite weak as well, right? Including debate about how to score the cost of extending Trump's tax cuts. But he did say that both chambers would work with the White House. That's not solvency, right? That doesn't say that the bill will pass. That just says both chambers will talk with Trump, I guess, and it will be a busy time. So this still seems quite shaky to me. That after a last minute scramble, both chambers did this. I already said that. Republicans must now, right? Like this is a requirement. They must reconcile those differences. Not that they have reconciled those differences or that they will reconcile those differences. That's very different. And House Republicans are hitting the ground running. Okay, so they're doing things, right? We don't know that that's actually going to hit the ground running in terms of resolving disputes between the different factions of the Republican Party. Then we go down here. Top Republicans will have to. Again, this is a demand. This is not something that is just description of success in the status quo. They will have to work through the different numbers as they write the package. Um, and it's talking about contentious details, right? Because it says, I guess the moderates are raising concerns about slashes, while the hardline conservatives are demanding that the bill be deficit neutral. Those are clashing. Like this is not stuff that seems to have been resolved right now. A major question remains about the timeline for getting the entire process wrapped up. There's a goal, but we don't know that that's going to be hit, right? It could easily be bumped back. Like this card seems awful, actually. This is the only saving grace of the card, maybe, but it's just one guy. It says, this guy says, I wouldn't say we're all dug in on it, but since the president's leaning toward the current policy, I think that's probably the direction that has a better chance of succeeding. This seems like pretty weak, right? Like this is the only sentence on the entire card that says anything like the claim made by the tag. And it's one guy who's saying, yeah, maybe it's a slightly better chance of succeeding. Which seems like pretty weak phrasing anyway. Like certainly, I don't think this is enough to say, yes, it is going to pass now. And if anything, like there's a lot of warrants in this card, a lot of words around what is highlighted that seem to imply that it's quite unlikely, or at the very least, like it's very up in the air if it gets passed right now. So I mean, to be fair, maybe that's what they want, right? They want to say it narrowly will pass now, so that the bar they have to cross with the link is quite low. But it's very difficult to walk the line and to do that without non-uniquing yourself a little bit. I think that this is certainly not enough to prove that there's a 100% chance that it passes if we do nothing. Maybe this is like there's like a 55% chance that it passes if we do nothing. Also, spoiler, they couldn't have known this, but after the TOC, it did not pass. They actually were unable to do this, which is so like I feel like that's proof that a card like this is certainly not something that actually proves it. It's a bit of a, it doesn't really matter because this is not something that we could have known at the time, and we're doing technical debate, tech over truth, etc. But I do think that goes to show like maybe this isn't the best card. Next, heightened nuclear is alienating. Okay, so we have two cards in a row that are kind of link cards, effectively. I think these cards are actually quite good. This card is maybe the best card in the contention. Trump's capricious stances are reflected in his coalition. Um, so okay, we've got like here are the people who are for nuclear. Here are the people who are against nuclear. Problem is, the people against nuclear are probably going to win. Basically, they have a stronger stance in Congress. The natural gas lobby, for example, has deep ties to Republicans. It might prefer that the subsidies for nuclear are not going to happen. And big tech is not going to fight back very hard. They're the ones who might want the subsidies for nuclear. But they don't really care about long-term emissions, so they would not complain very much. And Trump is a big fan of gas. Plus, there's all these concerns about spending. And so all of this together means that the Republicans who are against nuclear energy are probably going to have a stronger position, even accounting for things like Elon Musk possibly favoring nuclear and big tech possibly favoring nuclear, um, which makes sense, right? Like we have a more concentrated um, a more concentrated coalition of interests, like an interest group that's built existentially around ensuring natural gas and ensuring fossil fuels. And they're likely going to be much more interested in spending that lobbying money and that energy and that political capital on fighting nuclear energy than the more diverse and kind of spread out coalition that would be behind nuclear that doesn't necessarily exclusively favor it. So that makes sense. Then we have this card that says it creates divides. This is also a great card. It's got like it's filled with examples of like this guy and this person who all are either against nuclear energy or who are pro nuclear energy people who have left, right? So it means that the bipartisanship we've seen in the past is sort of falling apart now or is likely to, which is great. It also probably beats a lot of the cards that the other side might be intending to read. Next, we have spending concerns come first. This is interesting. We kind of have a diversification of warrants in this case. There's like a few different reasons why Republicans will backlash against nuclear energy, and this will cause heated debate. One was this natural gas lobby stuff that was in one of the previous cards, and the other one is the spending concern stuff that was also in one of the previous cards, but is mostly here. I think the unfortunate thing about this card is that it's from 2015, so you get out like you get beaten on time frame on what appears to be a very, very this is an issue where it's very important to post date. And this card is not it for post dating. So any card that's like remotely more recent on what the interests of the politicians actually are is going to beat this, even if the warranting is quite good. Which maybe it is. It does make the claim at the very least that they care more about spending, which is why they are on net against nuclear energy. It's just quite old. March's vote ensures a year-long defense CR that collapses starts and ensures escalation. What the heck does this mean? A year-long defense CR means, so a CR is this thing here, a continuing resolution. That means in the case that the politicians in Congress are unable to decide together on a budget deal, like the one that we're talking about in the link here, then there will be a year-long period where we continue the same funding from the previous fiscal year without any changes. So we don't add any funding. For defense, this means that the DoD, for example, would still have the exact same funding as they did the previous year for existing things. Like if they have existing drone contracts, for example, or existing projects to build like new fighter jets, those will still get funded the same. The problem is that this prevents them from being able to create new projects with new allocations of funding that would require them to get approval from Congress for those specific budgets. And this is the sticking point, according to the next cards, which are the internal links, because the defense industry specifically needs to like stay ahead of the curve to remain competitive and retain things like deterrence. It's not enough just to continue funding the same projects as before. We have to create new projects to stay ahead of adversaries like China. So cool. Problem with the card, it seems fairly speculative. I don't know. It says a truly clean full year continuing resolution would mean no new starts on critical programs the military needs to adapt to rapidly challenging battlefield. Um, but I don't know if there's anything. I guess it does say that this would come from failing to pass full year defense appropriations for the first time in memory. Um, but it's kind of unclear if this necessarily is guaranteed. Like, could we just do something that's not a full year continuing resolution instead? It seems like this would be something that people would support for the defense industry as at the very least. Like, why can't we have a carve out? I don't know that this evidence says anything that necessitates that this is the only other alternative. And it also says it would be unprecedented, which maybe is evidence for it being very huge for the internal link and impact scenario, but maybe is also like evidence that this is unlikely. Like get if in the case where this is not necessitated, like it's not a necessitated dichotomy between passing the budget proposal and having a 1 year clean continuing resolution. Clean, by the way, in this context means that they don't add any things on top. Because technically you can have a year-long continuing resolution that still also adds a few things. So it's like a modified continuing resolution, like specific carve-outs for defense, for example. It's unclear why this is the only dichotomy, like why this is a guaranteed dichotomy. Certainly nothing in this evidence, I think, suggests that or gives any warrants why that would be the case. So I actually think the easiest response to this whole stuff is like, if this fails to pass, we will not have a clean year-long continuing resolution because people will complain about exactly this. And those people who are complaining, like the defense industry, have very loud voice in Congress, so they would just convene again and make a specific carve out that is bipartisan for specifically defense. I feel like that would probably solve. So I'm a little bit unclear why this is necessarily the case if we fail to pass the budget now. Um, a lot of other things are sort of assumed here. Like I don't know why the AF necessarily goes into force before May. Like budget proposals, there is a year-long budget proposal that Congress passes, but it's unclear why we can't just funnel more of the money that it already exists in that budget proposal for the DOE, for example, through like an executive order that is also federal government into nuclear projects. Like that's something that's happened in the past. Most of the time we increase funding for nuclear energy. It hasn't happened through the congressional budget proposals necessarily. A lot of the time it's through executive order or agency specific decisions that use money that is already like earmarked for those agencies. So I'm not sure like this necessarily would go through Congress immediately in this budgetary proposal as the normal means, especially because it usually takes a while to hammer out the specifics of the policy. So I would argue maybe it would be more likely to happen after May, but who knows? Next card that goes nuclear. Interesting. So China is doing nuclear weapons. If we're behind on nuclear superiority, then there's a lot of risks. Problem with this card, again, same as the internal link card from the last contention, is like I feel like you're sacrificing a little bit of uniqueness for higher magnitude because there's certainly a lot of stuff in this card that would thump or non-unique you, right? Like this card is written in the context of the status quo as well. So, and it's also from what, 2023? Yeah, 2023. So this either should have already happened as a thumper or is going to happen regardless of the budget thing, the continuing resolution. There's probably a million other alt causes to the relative decline in US nuclear superiority vis-a-vis China. So I don't really know that this is attuned very well to the specific link of the continuing resolution. Um, and okay, this is where the contingent stops. So I would say this is one of the weaker cards. There are a few very strong cards. Like I think the link cards here are great and they're diversified in terms of warranting, which is great. But the uniqueness stuff here I think is not the best. I think that the impact stuff here is also not the best because of uniqueness stuff as well. So I generally like the contention. I think that it's put together quite well. But I don't see a lot of stuff. I think that the weakest part is by far the uniqueness. Um, what are other things? The last thing I'll say about why this is a strategic contention is one, I think a lot of people aren't ready to answer this kind of politics stuff if you're like out prepped. Like the link cards in this contention, and arguably the first uniqueness card, I think, although I think it's not actually quite good, they're going to be out prepped compared to a lot of the answers to politics that might be dated. And so if you have those really good cards, it's sometimes hard to get ahead on the defense against the link. The other thing that I think is strategic about it is potentially you could also like find a spike in here, like cross apply the warranting about why um, Republicans hate nuclear appropriations and hate the subsidies and stuff. And then you could use that to say this means that even if it does pass, this will like gut and undermine a lot of the important pieces of the nuclear spending. So like maybe Republicans will make either one, this will cause concessions to the gas lobby. So you get more nuclear energy, but you also get more gas. So on net, you get more climate change. Or two, you get another scenario that's like the nuclear energy gets passed with a bunch of loopholes that allow gas to still outcompete it, which means the nuclear projects are set up to fail and they don't get enough money allocated in the right ways. And there's like a bunch of like political volatility around it extending into the future that even though there's fiat, it doesn't overcome the volatile political landscape that deters investment, which might prevent this from getting off its feet. Even if it has secured public investment, maybe the private investors don't know about fiat power, and so they view the volatility of the debates in Congress that it will happen post the AF as being sufficient to dissuade them from investment. Those could be potential spikes that prevent or turn the AF's solvency as well, even if you don't win every part of the scenario. So I think that's very strategic. In general, I think it's strategic to have cases that are set up like this, where you know how, even if you lose an entire contention, you can go for a specific card to be terminal defense or a turn on the most common advocacies from the other side. Or if it's round by round, like if this is tailored for a specific team. Drake, for example, presumably knew that Plano had gone for things like warming and a lot of the other like topical substance rounds in the past. And so you can tailor it to the specific scenario you expect them to read as well, which could be even more strategic. Speaking of strategic, let's talk about contention three. I think contention three is like by far the most strategic out of all of the contentions in the neg constructive here. The reason why is because it has so many different pieces that you can totally win off on their own, that are all independent of one another, which makes it incredibly difficult to respond to because it's so dense and each part is independent of one another. But also, you can very easily use this as a strategy in addition to a different offensive collapse, which is what actually ended up happening in this round. So all of this functions as like an extra rebuttal on their case that applies no matter what. So the way you can think about this is like, let's say you read three contentions on their contention one. This has one, two, three, four, five, and then number five has a bunch of stuff inside it. What is it? It has, I think, four subpoints within it. So that means in total, we're looking at eight. We're looking at eight different responses that apply to any AF argument that depends on nuclear energy being built or working in the first place, which is, I think, almost 100% of them. It's very difficult to sneak out of that. Like, I guess there's some AF arguments that are about like upgrades and like repairs and stuff, but most of these would even still apply to those. But what that means is if you read three responses on their first contention, you actually have 11 responses on their first contention in the round because you like automatically add a floating eight responses to every single contention, which is incredibly difficult for them to respond to. I love the placement of this as well. It's so strategic putting it at the very end, especially if you are first speaking in the round, because what often happens is the second rebuttal is spread so thin in these rounds, right? Like the second rebuttal has to get through all of your first rebuttal 4 minute dump on their case, and then go through your contention one and your contention two, which on their own are pretty difficult to get through. And then they have to like line by line every single one of these eight responses at the very end of their rebuttal often, unless they do something weird with the order, which is sometimes risky for making sure that judges can follow your flow, and also just like not very common. Which means that placing this at the very bottom means it's incredibly likely that one of these at least gets undercovered, if not just flat out dropped, and then you can just go for it as terminal defense. GG, round over. We win a risk of offense on one of the other DAs and we win. Or you just go for this on its own and maybe there's some other offensive potential built in besides just default neg, or presumption. And so I think this is incredibly strategic. But let's look at each individual part. So first, Trump sabotages himself. This is Doge. It's attacking the LPO, which provides long-term financing. Um, it's great. This is a wonderful card. Um, yeah, this is all the same card. So the Doge program asked like half of them to resign. This is a really important part. LPO said that it could lose so much of its staff that it can no longer support development of new nuclear reactors, which is crazy because it says that this thing has been like instrumental for nuclear energy investment. The office's ability to underwrite and monitor projects depends on specialized staff. Trump could be blowing a rare window of opportunity. And yeah, it says the LPO has been the key guarantor for every new US nuclear energy project this century, except for one. So that's huge. Like this is as close to terminal as you can get off of each of these. And it's a quite a good card. So I think this is like A plus. A few problems. Number one, I think to get around this, you just need to have an understanding of what this even means. So the way that a guarantor works, is this is talking about loan guarantees. You can see this in the examples right here, right? So it's every nuclear plant often requires loan guarantees. A loan guarantee from the federal government just means that they will guarantee that you will get this loan at a fixed interest rate and they won't like take it away for any reason or they won't change the interest rate. Um, which is important for investors to know that there is stability in the investment. And it sort of like doesn't depend on changes in the project either. And this is really important for them to be able to get off of the ground in the first place and acquire capital that they can put into the original construction of the plants. This is not money from the federal government, to be clear. This is just like the federal government uses its power to guarantee that when they take out a loan, so when they borrow money, when the nuclear energy company borrows money, that they will be able to get a fixed rate on how much they have to pay back. That's usually quite low. Like, I think maybe sometimes it's even zero. I'm not 100% sure. But regardless, that just means that they're guaranteeing the ability for nuclear energy companies to borrow money with low interest rates. Thing is, that all just comes back to money, right? So, like, you know what else is even better than guaranteeing they can borrow money and then pay it back? Just giving them money. So subsidies seem to just skirt around this very cleanly. Like you don't need a loan guarantee if you are just given a $12 billion subsidy instead that you don't have to pay back. So then the LPO just becomes irrelevant, and the subsidies might be a genuine part of the most probable implementation of the AF, which means the AF just sort of solves this problem or sidesteps it, or the AF could just look like an investment into the LPO as well. Like there's an argument that says like if X is necessary to expanding nuclear energy. Like everyone knows that, and therefore an investment in nuclear energy requires an investment in X. And so the AF will be used to fund the LPO and get it more staff as well. So maybe the AF solves this, and this is just uniqueness for the AF. But I think it's a great card. If you like mishandle it, it's GG. Second one, overruns and deceptive estimates. Okay, so Utah terminated one of them because there were challenges, there were cost overruns. You can't trust the estimates. And the average, yeah, they take longer and they are much more expensive than they say they are at the start. I don't know if this is terminal. One problem with all of this is like I don't know if any of this is actually terminal. It's all phrased as terminal. I think that Ishan did a good job of cutting these cards. Almost all of them have a line in them that make them seem terminal. I don't know if that makes them terminal in like logical reality, right? Like I could theoretically concede this and just be like, look at the past. We have had successful nuclear projects, so then half of these goes away. Like any of these that do not have a unique reason why it is different now will, I think, automatically go away just with the trivial observation that nuclear energy projects with government investment have succeeded in the past. Like, yes, maybe not all of them, but like a lot of them, and that's sufficient for AF solvency. So at the very best, this is mitigatory. And that seems to fit this second one as well. I think this is one of the weaker ones, is the cost overruns. Yes, it is. There's a part that makes it seem terminal, I think, which is the fact that it terminated it, right? Like terminated that terminal, right? But the problem is, I think that this is this is not terminal because it only terminated one of them, or a handful of them, and it did not terminate the lion's share of them. The third argument is about injunctions. This one's super interesting. So I like that these are getting really independent of one another. Even when they secure every permit, a court can stop them. So courts might stop them. Um, and this has happened. Many projects get canceled. Many projects get canceled. Strategic non-highlighting of the word many here, but projects get canceled. That seems terminal. The problem is the word many means this is clearly mitigatory. Again, there's no reason why this is different now. So trivially observing that it has been successful in the past despite this is enough to shoot this down, I think. Um, like yes, maybe some investors, at least one investor gives up, is what this card implies. But that doesn't mean that the majority of investors give up, and I think empirically that seems like a false claim. The next one, so this one is more dangerous because this is a specific court case that is unique. So it's not enough to just observe that past investments have succeeded. So Texas versus NRC. This is a case, I guess, in the Supreme Court. The ramifications of this could determine the American nuclear industry's approach to waste storage for the foreseeable future. Okay, what is the case? Uncertainty about waste storage could hamper the expansion of the industry. Ruling against the NRC would change how complaints can be brought. That creates precedent that allows more lawsuits to go against nuclear energy companies. It's all about NIMBYism, and the decision will be in June. This is the part that makes it seem terminal, right? At stake is nothing less than the future of America's nuclear power industry. That sounds terminal, but it technically, as worded, it's not, right? Like, it's true. The future of America's nuclear industry will change. And it does make this clear how you should read this earlier, right? It says this could determine the American nuclear industry's approach to waste storage for the future, which is the future of America's nuclear power industry. I don't think that this is sufficient to imply that like if this decision happens, like the entire industry just immediately goes away overnight or something like that. Like that seems probably false. But let's continue. So it seems like maybe this is more about just how the nuclear industry approaches waste, which, maybe it's not so terminal. The next card, I think, kind of proves that it's not so terminal. The first paragraph says, it's unclear at this point whether that's possible. The Supreme Court's decision could either facilitate a national plan or freeze it. A proposed storage site in New Mexico would likely be affected too. So facilitate a national plan or freeze it. A storage site in New Mexico would be affected too. So maybe we're talking about like a few different storage sites for nuclear waste being changed or frozen temporarily. I don't know why this is something that will like completely halt progress on nuclear advancement. I understand that it might affect progress on nuclear advancement or slow it, but I don't really think there's anything to suggest that it will like grind the entire industry to a halt. But this card does, to be fair, say that there are reports that suggest that they might be leaning Texas's way. Again, I don't know that this is 100% evidence. It's hard to predict these kinds of things, and reports might not be the best evidence anyway. And so maybe there's like a 60% chance that this happens. And if it happens, there's like a slowdown in nuclear development as they figure out the waste problem. Okay. Fifth is incentives. There's a bunch of stuff here. The basic thesis of this is just that like the incentives behind the people who are making decisions about making nuclear energy are not very good. And so they don't have incentives to make it succeed all the time. So one reason is because the investors get a lot of cash, even if it fails, with something called a golden parachute, or not the investors, the executives at the very least. So the executives who are in charge of it, they're willing to like make the project go like way too expensive, and they don't really care if it fails because they get a payoff either way. Um, the next one is corruption. I don't really know what the internal link for corruption is on why nuclear energy fails. Like it could be a reason nuclear energy succeeds, right? Like one argument is that maybe like state level corruption means that nuclear energy projects get like subsidies prioritized for them over like natural gas projects. That seems like a reason why corruption means that it's more likely to succeed. But maybe this means that they are like less efficient or something. I don't know that that would be terminal though. What might be terminal is this stuff about the industry can't deliver. The U.S. lost its industrial base, including heavy forging capacity decades ago, and the costs of a major nuclear build out could now be in the trillions, which is crazy. I'm a little bit shocked that this is not highlighted. But to be fair, this does mean that like this sentence means that the implication of this is not that it's impossible, but that it's more costly, which is like an impact you could just eat as the AF. You'd be like, yes, this is just an independent DA that doesn't outweigh, um, but isn't like a solvency takeout, if that makes sense. The next one is politics. So this is kind of generic. It's just like applied to nuclear specifically, but as a general principle, the card says that government officials sometimes they do things that are like infrastructure, um, because even if they know that it won't succeed, they'll still do it to look good in the short term because of like time horizons for political incentives being quite short, meaning that they know that like they won't be in that position anymore once the actual effects of it manifest. So they're fine doing things that are either actively harmful or at the very least won't follow through on the promised benefits because they know that they're not going to be the ones who have to take the blame for that. This is like, if a president might do something that causes a recession at the very end of their time in office, knowing that this will reflect badly not on them, but on the next president instead because the public is kind of stupid. Um, Problem with this is like, again, I think that this is a general principle that is taken out by the observation that nuclear has had success in the past. Um, and this principle just seems to apply to like any political decision, not just nuclear or any kind of infrastructure, for example. Yet again, all of those are thumpers as well. The next one says lobbying a company's pork barrel politics. This is just sort of another example of the political incentives. So they work in their own rational self-interest. The public is ignorant, which means that lobbying can create capture of agencies. Um, so this notably seems to imply that the nuclear lobby is quite strong, um, which I don't know why. Again, I don't know why this is bad. I mean, it does say that maybe they will. It makes reform of programs difficult, even if they're bad, right? So maybe this means that bad nuclear projects are kept around. But I don't know why it means that like there's no good nuclear projects either. Like this at best seems like it means that there's an an explosion of all kinds of nuclear projects, bad or good. But it does seem to rely on incentives of planners to make bad projects, which I guess depends on like the golden parachute stuff and stuff from before. But if you can make just the argument that like actually they make more profit when they have a successful nuclear power plant than when they don't, then I think most of this stuff actually goes away, just logically. Um, okay, next, propaganda. And actually, the last thing I want to say about the politics stuff is that this could backfire, right? If the nuclear lobbying is that good, this actually might mean that nuclear projects can overcome some of the other limitations because they have political backing behind them, regardless of how successful the politicians expect them to be, which might beat some of the other restrictions on things like manpower or resources. Okay, next, propaganda. Okay, this is just like lots of the studies are wrong or like bad, so you should doubt some of them. I think this is the least useful of all of these, and certainly not terminal in any way. Like even if this card is true, it doesn't mean that the studies that the AF is citing are specifically wrong. Like maybe most of the studies are wrong, but maybe the AF studies are the specific ones that are good, or maybe they post-date this or whatever. I'm not sure that this applies to all of the evidence that's read on the pro. And so at best, you just have this implication, be skeptical, but I don't know what that technically does in the round, other than maybe you can use it as like a tiebreaker if two pieces of evidence are directly contradictory and there's no other better tiebreakers that are out there. But this one I think is like the least useful to have. Maybe it like applies to judge psychology in a way that could be useful. But yeah, that's my take on the negative constructive. I think it's very strategic overall. Okay, now let's talk about the aft constructive. So the first contention is sort of new. I think it was broken new 2 rounds before. It was broken new at TOC and elimination rounds. So I think they had only run it one time before. So the logic was like maybe this catches Drake off their guard, I guess. I don't think it was very great logic because I think that it's sort of anticipated that before TOC finals, they're probably going to prep out like your new AF substance position, especially if they're expecting a substance round. Um, but I think it's, it's a decent position, so let's look through it. The contention is about the nuclear umbrellas. The first card is uniqueness. It says that it's falling now because we're relying on an aging stockpile, which increases a failure of deterrence. The reason is because plutonium pits are required for all nuclear weapons, but we currently cannot produce them at scale. Modernization efforts are underway. So arms control is dead. We are currently in an effort to upgrade weapons for the nuclear triad, but we aren't moving fast enough. So again, more uniqueness. And the reason why is because we don't have enough plutonium pits, I guess. It says, despite many difficulties, we're making some progress, but the mandated quota of 80 pits per year remains impossible to meet. Unclear like why that quota specifically is key. It seems like some progress at the very least is being made. Like this place, the Los Alamos place, is making progress toward its goal of 30 pits per year by 2028. Why is that not enough? I don't know. But the quota of 80 pits, um, which is apparently congressionally mandated, is impossible. So I don't know. There should be some evidence that says that 80 pits is uniquely key, but there isn't. So that might be a vulnerability of the case. Next, investment solve. So here's our link. Um, a little bit sus that it's from 2007, but let's read it. Plutonium is the linchpin of the strategy. It's a byproduct from burning uranium. In future fuel cycles, engineers must find methods to dispose of it. Um, we can reduce nuclear waste by using proliferation-resistant technologies to recycle these fuels. Um, I don't know if that says investment solves. I don't know if that's enough. Like, I guess this says that plutonium is a byproduct of burning uranium, which means that maybe it comes from commercial nuclear energy production, and we need methods to dispose of it. But this thing seems a little bit weird. I don't know what this means. Like maybe we can put the plutonium back in if plutonium is a fuel that can be recycled. But then if we're putting the plutonium back in, we're not using it for plutonium pits. So I don't really know. Next, production scales up. This is at least 2025. Um, the NNSA, so this is uniqueness again, rated a lot of them as insufficient. I don't know what the assets are. Assets related to the explosives program. I don't know if we can solve all of the assets related to the explosive program with our link, but maybe we can solve some. Planned explosives infrastructure is subject to budgetary constraints. Okay, but what is explosive infrastructure? Like, is that plutonium? I don't know. I don't know how much that is related to nuclear energy. Because even if we invest in explosives infrastructure, that might be like, T nuclear energy might apply here pretty hard. Even if some is related to nuclear energy, if this card proves that there are some explosives infrastructure that are subject to budgetary constraints that are key for modernization programs that are not invested in by the AF, then that still remains a sticking point for the link. Continuing resolutions have frequently been enacted to provide temporary funding. I mean, that seems like a non-unique. Can create uncertainty about which projects will be funded and at what level. Oh, interesting. Oh, this is interesting. As we previously reported, continuing resolutions create uncertainty. Um, so this is an interesting interaction actually between the politics DA and the AF's first contention. Because I guess if the politics DA triggers the 1 year continuing resolution for defense, it definitely takes out this link or like link turns it, which is interesting. So that's a little bit unstrategic, I would say, especially since we know like one, we go second in the round, so we already know that they're reading it, and second, we know that they're probably going to read it from the wiki. So I don't know that this is the most strategic thing, at least to highlight, right? But I guess they're attempting to make this uniqueness. The brink is now assuring allies is imperative for non-prolif regime. So the impact is prolif. So we have to assure allies by maintaining effective nuclear deterrence by having enough plutonium pits, which I guess somehow come from nuclear energy. Although I think the link evidence there is quite shaky. Otherwise, proliferation is imminent. And this is just stock, Japan, South Korea, Saudi Arabia, North Korea, Taiwan, Turkey, bunch of Poland, bunch of like nuclear prolif links, internal link. And then we get proxy wars. So we get conventional wars from prolif. Just jumping in here to add one thing that I forgot. This evidence here is actually quite bad. It says that proxy warfare is immune to deterrence, and nuclear deterrence actually might promote the recourse of other more irregular forms of conflict. The next sentence, I think, makes it very clear why this is bad. The possession of nuclear weapons is not enough to counter the resort to proxy warfare, but it may prevent the escalation of hostilities that encompass direct modes of confrontation. And the later sentence also makes this clear. The psychological component of the initial recourse to proxy war can be found in acute perceptions of the risks involved in undertaking alternative, more direct forms of intervention. So this evidence does not say proxy wars will increase. The only reason it would increase is if proxy wars replace more direct forms of intervention. So the evidence says when states want to be aggressive or when they are considering if they're going to go to war, then they're more likely to choose proxy wars that are not deterred by nuclear warheads, although the other more direct forms of intervention are deterred by nuclear warheads. So this has nothing to do with an increase in the amount of conflict. It's only an increase in the amount of proxy wars proportional to the amount of direct conflicts that would otherwise happen. But the total amounts of conflicts either still goes down or remains the same according to this evidence. So it's not really impact evidence or an internal link card whatsoever. I think that it's at best, this is just like saying nuclear warheads do not deter proxy wars, and therefore nuclear prolif does not solve proxy wars, but it definitely does not say that conflict, that any conventional conflict increases as a result of the possession of nuclear weapons. So I think that's pretty bad for this evidence. Okay, that makes sense. Then we have detrimental to de-escalatory measures. We get hedging, undercuts ability to prevent escalatory spiral. So this is good. This is like a link into the China war scenario. And then we have this sneaky defense here. Mad Thump's nuclear use. Chance at survival is preferred to guaranteed regime loss because they will always face retaliation. So no one will use nuclear weapons, I guess is the idea. So then the conventional proxy war scenario will beat the nuclear scenario from maybe the neg impact. So they've got this little mad spike as defense in here. That also will help you with the nuclear energy versus warming debate later on because the second condition is warming. So it helps you with some like sneaky impact defense against the nuclear energy or nuclear war extinction internal link. And then modernization increases arms controls. Okay, so then we also have like cool some solvency against Russia-China nuclear modernization. Leverage pressuring to negotiations. More, that's another solvency link to peace. So a lot of stuff here. I think there's a little bit too much put on like the impact and solvency stuff, and maybe not enough to strengthen the link. I think the link is maybe the like weakest part of all of this. So that's my biggest complaint. But I think it's a decent contention. It like is maybe hard to respond to if you don't have a lot of time thinking about it. So in terms of my analysis of this contention, these are the things that I sent to Arman and Anuj when they asked about like potential responses before they broke it. So I came up with 12 kind of off the dome with a few Google searches. One, I think is maybe the most obvious is just buy the plutonium from someone else or the finished pits from someone else. Clearly, like if they're necessary for nuclear modernization, like probably lots of people produce them. Two, I think we can just repurpose the existing nuclear plants. We don't need that many to make plutonium pits, which means we don't need a lot of investment, or maybe we don't need any investment if the DoD just sort of repurposes some other plants. Three, nuclear energy is not the limiting factor. We have enough plutonium. We just don't have enough like pits or facilities that make the plutonium into pits, which is it just seems true. Like I guess there's something that could be made into a card here. There's evidence. But also like it's kind of pointed out by the fact that they don't have any evidence about uniqueness that says we have a shortage of plutonium. They only have evidence that says we have a shortage of plutonium pits. And this is sort of further evidence by the fact that their evidence talks about like individual facilities that process plutonium pits, like the Los Alamos one. So it seems like if we just like that seems to be the limiting factor, not the amount of plutonium that we have. Um, Number four is that there's some evidence that there's solvency right now that maybe post dates. Number five, the pits take a long time to age out, so we could just do it later. Six, or at the very least, like the time frame on this argument is pretty decked. So if you want to do time frame weighing, it's pretty easy. Six, the stockpile. This is maybe the most killer response. The stockpile we have right now is 87 tons of plutonium. We only need 38 tons for 10,000 nuclear weapons. So like it seems like for the foreseeable future, well into the future, we probably will be fine. Seven, this is not the most likely implementation, maybe. It hasn't been done in the past. This is a decent response. I think it's a bit weak, though. Eight, there's a turn. Maybe modernization is bad, either because it kickstarts like an arms race. I know that they have evidence against that, so this is a weaker response, but it could be a turn. You could also have another one about how maybe like it ruins NPT credibility if we can continue modernizing our nuclear arsenals. Although to some extent this is non-unique, so who knows? 10, it might not be fast enough because their argument says that any delay in this will cause the impact. So even if we invest in nuclear energy right now, we won't get plutonium for a very long time. So maybe the impact will trigger before the solvency can solve it. 11, this is one of my favorite types of responses on this topic, is the T substantial non-unique. So the argument here is just like, if they're right, that this is a likely implementation, that also means it is likely in the status quo if we prove that it doesn't require the topic. And in fact, it doesn't require the topic. It can be performed on the neg, and it therefore is likely to be performed on the neg because it doesn't require a substantial increase in investment in nuclear energy, because you could just like increase it a little bit just for plutonium pits. And so if they're right that this is a likely implementation, if we do pass the AF, it becomes also likely in the absence of the AF because it doesn't require the AF. And then number 12 is just like maybe there's no prolif impacts. There's like I know that there's some cards that are generics that say like the prolif stuff hasn't created proxy wars in the past. So I think that the probably the most damning responses are the ones toward the top, like just buy plutonium from someone else, or we're solving now, or we have a stockpile, etc. And I think that they might have a difficult time answering some of those arguments, because they seem kind of true. Maybe especially like the one about the distinction between plutonium and pits. I think that's pretty damning. For contingent two about warming, I think this is just the truest argument on the topic, so I'm quite biased. I also wrote a lot of the evidence here, which again biases me, but let's analyze it, try to do it from a sober perspective. Okay, world is not on track to meet the 1.5 degrees Celsius stuff. Yeah, this is decent uniqueness. Um, it's pretty recent as well. That's nice. Nuclear can scale up. Um, Oh, this is great. Solar and wind have renewability problems due to resource limits. So this is a hidden sort of piece of defense against renewables, which is really nice. But nuclear technology can provide 9,000 years of energy and waste can become fuel. So we have recycling. This is, I think, incredibly efficient to do a lot of different things in the round. It can solve some of the waste arguments that the negative might make, either in rebuttal or even the one that they have in constructive about the waste management from the Texas versus NRC case, which I think is a cross application that Anuj makes later in the round. It also means that it solves any arguments about like uranium shortages, and it's a good piece of defense that seems fairly terminal at first glance against renewables being a viable solution in the future, which is great uniqueness. Three links. Okay, number one, either it trades off with renewables, so it's better, right? It needs fewer materials, it needs less land, governments need to shoulder the costs for nuclear energy, or it complements renewables. So either it trades off with them and it's better, or it complements renewables. So this evidence says Nuclear power can provide intermittent, like a base load power to back up wind and solar, which is great. And this could solve warming. Reliable power is not enough, or renewable power is not enough. Nuclear energy has to fill the gap, so it's required. Cool. I mean, that's generic stuff. I think it's fairly nuanced, which is smart. It gets around a lot of the common issues with the nuclear versus renewables debate, and I like the kind of even if that's built into it. Number two, it trades off with fossil fuels. Sweden proves. This evidence is great. I've ranted about it in past videos, but it's just such a good empiric that nuclear energy, this is like the most rapid installation of low CO2 electricity in history. And it like it just worked, in like 10 years emissions were slashed 75% despite a massive increase in electricity use and economic growth. So it automatically helps you frontline a lot of the common complaints because it just did work, and the evidence is quite explicit, but not with renewables. So again, we have another spike against renewables. This evidence says renewables did not displace fossil fuels. Again, this is evidence that I cut that I think is quite good, but they've been like every round they highlight a little bit less of it, I think. So infrastructural path dependency insulated fossil fuels from competition. The nice thing about this evidence is that if you look at the other words, it also says like this is only true in countries that did not have nuclear energy. So renewables actually become more effective at displacing fossil fuels when you have nuclear energy, but this wasn't highlighted. Fossil fuels cause warming. This is kind of trivial. I don't actually know. I'm not convinced they needed this in the case, but it's there just in case the other team says that like warming is fake, which might have been smart in this round because I think Strake is more likely in TOC finals to whip out some stuff that is like climate change is fake. We saw that they did end up actually reading impact defense, but it wasn't sort of the impact defense that would have been preempted by this. But maybe it's a strategic thing to read. Then it's the most probable cause of extinction. I like this evidence a lot. Lots of internal links to their impact scenarios about things like um, oh, actually, this evidence is not mine. This is Ayusha's evidence. But this evidence is great. It's another spike against nuclear winter. So we had the mutually assured destruction one originally, and then here's another spike against nuclear war weighing that says like nuclear war doesn't cause extinction. Um, International competition is the third link. So this is just like more climate stuff in the US spills over, so that we have more solvency around the world. And then warming turns all impacts. This is the evidence I was referring to earlier. It just has like a bunch of internal links to extinction and to their impact scenarios as well, like war, which allows you to link into what their terminal impact is or their impact scenario is, but just with a wider scope and with a better duration, like multiple times in different places and in different years, which should be pretty good for weighing later. And then it's scalar. Pierce 23, every zero point 0.1 degree of warming causes 100 million deaths, which is also very important. I kind of wish they also added some like air pollution scalar impact evidence here, just in case, because it seemed like the strategy that they knew they were going for, because the next thing that they read was about probability weighing, might have also been about like maybe not going for extinction intentionally. So it would have been easier probably against some of the generic impact defense to just go for like air pollution kills lots of people, which is probably the warrant in this card. Although maybe not, maybe not. This seems like not about air pollution, but could be something that would add as well to the argument and like diversify the impact scenario further. But I think it's a good argument. I think that, yeah, warming is a great argument. The next thing that they said is actually not in the doc. We can listen to it in the actual recording. So let's go pop over there. Okay, so this is around the point in the aff constructive where Armand sort of goes off of the constructive and has extra time to start doing weighing and respond to the first negative constructive. I think this is incredibly strategic. I've said my thoughts on this in past videos, but I think that every team should be doing this when they're second because it creates much more flexibility. It throws off the first speaking team. It prevents them from using the first rebuttal very strategically. It throws off their prep out, for example, if they have one, which is likely something that they had in this round, and it prevents them from reading some of their responses on your case as well. And also, it's just super strategic because it pushes some of the debate that you'll have on their case one speech earlier, which means if they do slip up and they concede something or they mishandle something, you have an extra speech to clarify exactly what it was that they mishandled and how bad it is for them, which makes it much more likely that judges will actually vote on that as being like terminal defense or something. So you can like get to GG much earlier in the round, and it gives you multiple opportunities to respond to something. So you have much more strategic flexibility as well. But let's listen to what Armand is saying.
Trigger catastrophic risk, worst pandemics, probability, lack of water, it's killer, pitch, point 3. Every point of your warning cause 100 billion deaths. Probability for extinction, swamps time frame, the asteroid that killed the dinosaurs came 100 years later. It wouldn't have made a difference, assuming that earthquakes have 100% probability for quantum dimensions. There, okay.
Okay, so the weighing here, it's a little bit fast, so it might be hard to hear, but he says probability comparisons and extinction debates swamp time frame. The reason why is because like this asteroid analogy, like no one cares when the asteroid actually like made all the dinosaurs go extinct. It just is important that it happened in the first place. And so in terms of expected value, it's all just magnitude times probability. Like time frame doesn't really have an effect on expected value unless you use it as an internal link into magnitude to probability. And he says the next line he says is a nice little spike that says, assuming that their arguments have 100% probability requires judge intervention. I wish there was a little bit more warranting for this, like their authors say could or stuff like that. But it is true even without warranting. I think it's logically true. And so the fact that he at least got that statement out there is nice because it will prevent them from making the intuitive response, which is just that we have 100% probability if we win our link. It would have also been nice, I think, and we'll see why later in the round, but it would have also been nice if he said something about how the empirics can help with probability here, because that would have been able to spike the other intuitive response that they'll make, which is that probability is difficult to measure, which is in fact something that Jason does say. And then it would have made the flow a little bit cleaner on the weighing debate. But at the very least, it's nice that he's getting weighing out there. Um, then he goes to their case and he reads some other responses. So I will go back to the doc because I also have these responses. Okay, so here are all the responses that Armand gets through on their case. He starts with the AI bubble and basically just says it's not likely because democratic countries don't turn to war to distract because war is negatively perceived by the public. I think this also like doesn't only apply to democratic countries. I kind of wish he implicated it to any countries because their internal link in the first place is about like diversionary conflict, so it's inherently about the perceptions of the public or maybe some oligarchs or something. Either way, this warrant probably applies. So politicians lose popularity, and like people will get very mad if they go to war while the economy is very bad. So it looks like the government doesn't care about domestic industries, and all their examples are about authoritarian countries. I think this is a very smart, intuitive response that makes sense. At the very least, it's some ink on the flow that they have to get through. Next on politics, I think it's smart to read as many responses on politics as possible. This demonstrates a little bit of round vision, like not having as many responses on contention one and dumping more on contention two because they know that contention two is maybe the more dangerous contention. I think contention two and contention three are probably equally dangerous in this round. But it was some good round vision. Probably he had looked at the wikis before, looked at round reports, knew that they are more likely to go for politics. And so he spent more time giving extra responses to politics early in the round. So he says, one, nuclear lobbying overwhelms. This is very good work on the implication. So this outweighs, or like on net reasons to prefer. This outweighs anyone against government spending, which is their at least one of their primary links, because lobbyists control their election outcomes and pay them off, which can overcome their personal beliefs. This means lobbying fails, and Republicans can still do the bill because they have new ties with lobbyists. I think that response is wonderful. The card is not wonderful. It's reason enough. It says that the green lobby is rising, which marks a shift in power dynamics traditionally dominated by fossil fuel interests. Lawmakers are now balancing demands from various interest groups. One, this doesn't necessarily say that the green lobby is outpacing fossil fuels. Maybe it's like growing faster, but it does not make the claim that like the green lobby is now stronger than fossil fuel interests. And two, importantly, I think it's mostly talking about renewable energy like you see in the small text, renewable energy firms. So it's not actually nuclear lobby. I wish though that he had said something like their evidence concedes this, which is true. Like we saw earlier, a lot of the stuff from the one and C, or what they call the one and C, the negative constructive speech talks a lot about how the nuclear lobby is very powerful, and they say that's a bad thing. Like that creates sort of moral hazard incentives to make projects that will fail, but it still concedes that the nuclear lobby is in fact very powerful. So I wish that he had said like their evidence concedes that this is true. We just need to win the implication off of this. The second response is no backlash from oil companies. I kind of think this applies. I guess it applies to the gas warrant, uh, ish. I think it's not the primary link in the politics scenario, but I think it's a smart response to make, especially because it's kind of preempting this green paradox argument that they know is going to be read later in the round because it's Strake has read it in the past, and they've like disclosed their rebuttal docs. So it's smart to put it here. It won't pass. This evidence is actually really good. I like the implication as well. Like their uniqueness is a day later, but it can't change that fast. And we indict their warrants. That's perfect. And this evidence, I actually do think this evidence is stronger than the original uniqueness evidence that is read in the negative constructive. Because the uniqueness evidence in the negative construction, if you remember correctly, it made a lot of sort of projections, or not even projections. It was just like we have to do this. Republicans have to do this to get it passed, but not a lot of claims about actually if it was likely to get passed, other than one dude saying like maybe it's more likely than not, probably. Um, so I actually think this evidence is quite a bit better, uh, and I think that it is a very strong response on the link. And then finally, I don't know if this is really a different response. This seems like maybe the same response as before or a warrant for the previous card. But they have this evidence that I think they took from Strake, that says that this adds like a ton of money to the debt, which means that like if they are so reticent to approve a package that will increase the debt in any way or increase spending, then they just simply won't pass this either way. I think you could implicate this a little bit better as well. Like this won't be the straw that breaks the camel's back. If it's already 5.7 trillion, what are we adding like 2 billion, like 20 billion, 200 billion? Either way, this is not going to make a big dent in the package that's already 5.7 trillion. So it's not likely to be like make or break. Even if it's true that this is one controversial like line item on the budget, there are so many other controversial line items on the budget already. In fact, 5.7 trillion's worth. And so this is unlikely to be the thing that actually like that is the delta between it passing or not passing. So I think that these are quite good responses that will be very annoying for Jason to have to deal with before giving the prep out to the AF constructive.